Imagine this. You walk into a job interview feeling confident. You spent hours preparing. You practiced your answers. You wore your best clothes. You even arrived early.
And then somehow, you still do not get the job.
Exactly. And the worst part is, most people never find out why.
They just get that painful email saying, "We decided to move forward with another candidate."
And then they sit there wondering what went wrong.
Was it something they said? Something they did? Did they look nervous? Did they talk too much? Did they answer one question badly?
Sometimes getting rejected is not about lacking experience or qualifications.
Sometimes it's about making one small mistake that quietly changes the interviewer's opinion of you.
Exactly. One careless comment, one awkward answer, one moment of bad body language.
And suddenly, the interviewer starts thinking, maybe this person is not the right fit.
Today, on Talk Easy Daily, we're going to talk about 20 job interview mistakes that can cost you the job.
And trust me, some of these mistakes are so common that people make them without even realizing it.
We're talking about mistakes before the interview, during the interview, and even after the interview is over.
Because yes, believe it or not, some people lose the job after they leave the room.
Exactly. And one of the biggest mistakes we will talk about later seems very small, but it quietly destroys more interviews than people realize.
So make sure you stay until the end because that one could completely change the way you prepare for interviews.
Before we begin, comment below and tell us this. What is the most nervous you have ever been before a job interview?
I remember one time I was so nervous that I kept repeating my own name in my head because I was afraid I would forget it.
That's actually more common than people think. Interviews can make even confident people feel nervous.
Exactly, because you know that one conversation could completely change your future.
One interview could lead to a new job, a better salary, a new city, or even a completely different life.
Which is why preparation matters so much.
Because when you know what mistakes to avoid, you immediately feel more confident.
Exactly. And let's start with something people often forget.
What is that? The interview starts before the interview actually starts.
That is so true.
The moment you walk into the building, people notice you.
The receptionist notices you. Other employees notice you.
Even the way you sit in the waiting room says something about you.
So if someone walks in looking annoyed, speaking rudely, or scrolling on their phone without paying attention, that already creates a bad impression.
Exactly. Many companies care about how you treat everyone, not only the manager interviewing you.
Because if you're rude to the receptionist but polite to the manager, that says a lot about your character.
Very true. And here's something important to remember. Most interview mistakes are not dramatic.
They're small things.
Small things that slowly build a negative impression.
A weak handshake, poor eye contact, talking badly about your old boss, not asking questions.
Exactly. None of those things seem huge by themselves.
But together, they can quietly destroy your chances.
And in the next part, we are going to start with one of the most common mistakes people make before they even sit down in the interview room.
And trust me, almost everyone has made this mistake at least once.
If you are ready to become more confident in interviews, like this video, subscribe to Talk Easy Daily, and let's get started. One of the most common interview mistakes is arriving late.
That sounds obvious, but people still do it all the time.
They do. And the problem is not only that you're late, the problem is what happens after you're late.
You walk into the interview stressed, embarrassed, and out of breath.
Exactly. Your mind is racing, your confidence drops, and suddenly even simple questions become difficult.
Because when you're stressed, it's much harder to think clearly.
Very true. And from the interviewer's point of view, being late can make you seem unreliable.
They might think, if this person cannot be on time for an interview, how will they be on time for work?
Exactly. That's why it's always smart to arrive about 10 or 15 minutes early.
Not too early, though.
Right. Arriving 45 minutes early can also be awkward.
Because then the interviewer may feel pressured.
Exactly. 10 to 15 minutes early is usually perfect.
And if you're going somewhere unfamiliar, check the route before the interview day.
Yes, look at the route, check parking, and plan for traffic.
Because one small delay can create a lot of unnecessary stress.
Now here's another mistake that can cost you the job: dressing the wrong way.
Oh yes, people sometimes dress too casually or too formally.
Exactly. Your appearance sends a message before you even speak.
If you look messy, careless, or unprepared, people notice immediately.
Very true. And at the same time, if you dress in a way that doesn't match the company culture, that can also feel strange.
So if you're interviewing at a corporate office, professional clothing is usually best.
Yes, but if you're interviewing at a very casual startup company, you can dress slightly more relaxed while still looking clean and professional.
And people shouldn't forget the small details.
Exactly. Wrinkled clothes, dirty shoes, messy hair, or very strong perfume can all create the wrong impression.
Strong perfume is such a risky choice.
Very true. You want the interviewer to remember your skills, not your perfume.
Here's another huge mistake: not researching the company.
That's one of the fastest ways to look unprepared.
Because interviewers often ask questions like, "What do you know about our company?" or "Why do you want to work here?"
Exactly. And if your answer is, honestly, not much, that's a problem.
Because it sounds like you don't care.
Very true. Employers want people who are interested in the company and excited about the opportunity.
So before every interview, you should spend at least a little time researching the company.
Yes, learn what they do, what products or services they offer, what values they have, and what the role involves.
That makes your answers stronger because you can connect your skills to their needs.
Exactly. And it also makes you sound much more professional.
Here's another huge mistake that happens all the time: talking too much.
Yes, many people think they need to fill every second with words.
Especially when they're nervous.
Exactly. They answer one question, then keep talking and talking and talking. And sometimes they end up saying things they shouldn't say.
Very true. A good answer should be clear, focused, and not too long.
So if the interviewer asks, "Tell me about yourself," you should not give your entire life story.
Exactly. You want to answer the question directly, give a few useful details, and then stop.
That can be difficult because silence feels uncomfortable.
Yes, but silence is not always bad.
Exactly. Sometimes a short pause actually seems more thoughtful.
Exactly. Here's another major mistake: giving answers that are too short.
So people either talk too much or not enough.
Exactly. Some people answer every question with one sentence, like when the interviewer says, "What are your strengths?" and the person says, "I work hard."
That answer is too simple. It doesn't tell the interviewer much about you.
So what's better?
Give an example. Say something like, "One of my strengths is staying organized. In my previous job, I managed several projects at the same time and always met deadlines."
That answer feels much stronger because it gives proof.
Exactly. Employers remember stories and examples much more than simple adjectives.
Here is another mistake people make: speaking negatively about their previous boss or company.
That is a huge red flag.
Because even if your old job was terrible, complaining too much makes you sound negative.
Very true. Imagine the interviewer asks, "Why did you leave your previous job?"
And the person says, "Because my boss was terrible and everyone there was lazy."
That answer creates a very bad impression.
Because the interviewer might think, one day this person could talk about us the same way.
Exactly. A better answer would be something like, "I learned a lot in my previous role, but I'm looking for new opportunities to grow."
That sounds much more professional.
Exactly. Always stay respectful, even if you had a bad experience.
Because professionalism is not only about what you say, it's about how you say it.
Very true. In the next part, we're going to talk about body language mistakes, weak answers, and one thing people do during interviews that instantly makes them seem less confident.
And trust me, almost everyone does it without even realizing it.
So stay with us, because one of those mistakes could be the exact reason why interviews have not gone well for you in the past. One of the biggest mistakes people make in interviews is poor body language.
And the scary part is that people often don't realize they're doing it.
Exactly. You can have great experience, strong answers, and good qualifications, but if your body language looks nervous, closed off, or uninterested, it can completely change the interviewer's impression.
So, what are some examples of bad body language?
Avoiding eye contact is one of the biggest ones.
Because if you spend the whole interview looking at the floor or staring at the table, you seem nervous or unsure.
Exactly. Even if you are listening carefully, it can still make you look less confident.
What else?
Crossing your arms tightly, slouching in your chair, shaking your leg nonstop, touching your face too much, or constantly looking around the room.
Those small habits make you seem uncomfortable.
Very true. Another big mistake is checking your phone.
That's such a bad one.
Yes, even if you only check it for 1 second, it can make you seem distracted or disrespectful.
So before the interview starts, it's better to turn your phone off completely.
Exactly. And instead of nervous body language, try to sit up straight, smile naturally, and make comfortable eye contact.
You don't need to look perfect, you just need to look calm and engaged.
Exactly. Here's another mistake that makes people seem less confident: speaking too fast.
Nervous people do that all the time.
They do. When people are nervous, they often rush through their answers.
And then their words become less clear.
Exactly. They speak too quickly, forget details, and sometimes even lose their train of thought.
So slowing down actually makes you sound more confident.
Very true. Think about confident people. They don't rush every sentence.
They pause, they think, they speak clearly.
Exactly. A short pause before answering a question can make a huge difference.
Because it gives you time to think.
And it also makes you sound thoughtful.
Here's another common mistake: not listening carefully to the question.
Yes, some people are so nervous that they start preparing their answer before the interviewer even finishes speaking.
And then they answer the wrong question.
Exactly. Imagine the interviewer asks, "Can you tell me about a time you worked in a team?"
But the candidate starts talking about working alone.
Exactly. That shows poor listening skills.
And listening is such an important part of communication.
Very true. If you don't understand the question, it's okay to ask politely.
You can say, "Could you repeat the question?" Or, "Just to make sure I understand, are you asking about teamwork or leadership?"
Exactly. That's much better than giving the wrong answer.
Here's another mistake people make: memorizing answers too much.
Yes, preparation is good, but memorizing every word can make you sound robotic.
Because if you sound like you're reading from a script, the interview doesn't feel natural.
Exactly. And if the interviewer changes the question slightly, you panic because it's different from what you practiced.
So instead of memorizing full answers, people should memorize key ideas.
Yes, think about your strengths, your experience, and a few good stories you can use.
That way, your answers feel more flexible and natural.
Exactly. Here's another mistake that can quietly hurt your chances: using weak language.
Like saying maybe all the time.
Exactly. Words like maybe, I guess, sort of, and I think can make you sound unsure.
For example, if the interviewer asks, "Why should we hire you?" and you say, "I think maybe I could do a good job."
That sounds weak immediately.
A stronger answer would be, "I believe my experience and communication skills would allow me to contribute strongly to your team."
Exactly. Stronger language creates a stronger impression.
But there's also a difference between confidence and arrogance.
Very true. And acting arrogant is another big interview mistake.
Some people try so hard to sound confident that they end up sounding rude.
Exactly. They act like they already know everything, or like they're too good for the job.
But companies want people who are skilled but still open to learning.
Exactly. Because no matter how talented you are, nobody wants to work with someone who is difficult.
Exactly. In the next part, we're going to talk about mistakes people make at the end of the interview, including one thing that many people forget to do after they leave the room.
And believe it or not, that one small mistake can cost people the job even after the interview is over.
So stay with us because the final mistakes are some of the most important ones of all.
One of the biggest mistakes people make at the end of an interview is not asking any questions.
That's such a missed opportunity.
Very true. When the interviewer says, "Do you have any questions for us?" some candidates say, "No, I think I'm good."
And that makes it sound like they're not very interested.
Exactly. Asking good questions shows curiosity, confidence, and professionalism.
So, what are some good questions people can ask?
You can ask things like, "What does success look like in this role?" Or, "What are the biggest challenges someone in this position might face?"
Those questions sound thoughtful.
Exactly. You can also ask, "What do you enjoy most about working here?" Or, "What opportunities are there for growth?"
That makes the conversation feel more natural, too.
Very true. And it also helps you decide if the company is right for you.
Because interviews aren't only about them choosing you.
You're also deciding if you want to work there.
Here's another mistake people make: focusing too much on salary too early.
Yes, salary is important, of course, but if the first thing you ask is, "How much money will I make?" it can create the wrong impression.
Because it sounds like you only care about the paycheck.
Exactly. Employers want to feel that you're interested in the role and the company, too.
So, when is the right time to talk about salary?
Usually later in the process, unless the interviewer brings it up first.
That makes sense.
You want to first show why you're valuable, then salary becomes part of a professional conversation.
Here's another mistake that surprises a lot of people: looking too desperate.
Yes, sometimes candidates want the job so badly that they say things like, "I really need this job," or "I will do absolutely anything."
That can make the situation uncomfortable.
Very true. It's okay to want the job, but you should still sound calm and confident.
Because confidence is attractive.
Exactly. A better way to express excitement is to say something like, "I'm very excited about this opportunity because it matches my skills and goals."
That sounds much stronger and more professional.
Exactly. Here is another mistake: not bringing the right materials.
That can make you seem unprepared immediately.
Very true. Some people arrive without a resume, without a pen, without a notebook, or without any documents they might need.
Even if the interviewer already has your resume, it is still smart to bring extra copies.
Exactly, because sometimes another manager joins the interview unexpectedly.
And having a notebook makes you look more organized.
Very true. Here is another mistake that can cost you the job: not practicing enough before the interview.
Some people think they can just walk in and answer everything naturally.
Exactly, but interviews are a skill, and like any skill, they improve with practice.
So people should practice common questions before the interview.
Yes, questions like, "Tell me about yourself. What are your strengths? Why do you want this job? And why should we hire you?"
Because if you practice those questions, you feel less nervous.
Exactly. You do not need to memorize every word, but you should know the main points you want to say.
And it's even better if you practice out loud.
Very true, because when you hear yourself speaking, you can notice if an answer is too long, too short, or confusing.
Here's another mistake people make: they don't connect their answers to the job.
That's a huge one.
Because sometimes people give good answers, but the answers don't match the role they're applying for.
Exactly. For example, if you're applying for a customer service role, you should talk about communication, patience, and helping people.
But if you're applying for a leadership role, you should talk more about teamwork, decision-making, and managing people.
Exactly. You want the interviewer to clearly understand why you are a good fit.
So before every interview, it's important to study the job description carefully.
Yes, look at the skills they mention and think about examples from your own experience.
That makes your answers feel much more relevant.
Exactly. And relevance is powerful because employers want to feel that you understand the role.
Now let's talk about one mistake that happens after the interview is over.
Not following up.
A lot of people never send a thank you message.
Exactly. But a simple follow-up email can make a huge difference.
Because it shows professionalism.
Yes, it also reminds the interviewer who you are and shows that you are still interested in the role.
So what should the message say?
It can be very simple. You can thank the interviewer for their time, mention that you enjoyed the conversation, and say that you're excited about the opportunity.
That sounds easy, but I think many people skip it because they think it doesn't matter.
It matters more than people realize.
Because if two candidates have similar experience, the person who follows up may leave a stronger impression.
Exactly. And in the next part, we're going to talk about real-life examples, common interview situations, and the one small mistake that secretly destroys more interviews than people realize.
And trust me, when you hear that final mistake, you may completely change the way you prepare for interviews forever.
Let's imagine two candidates going into the same interview.
Same company, same position, same experience level?
Exactly. Both candidates have similar skills, both have similar education. On paper, they look almost identical.
But one gets the job and the other does not.
Exactly. The first candidate walks into the room late, breathing fast, holding papers everywhere, looking stressed.
That already feels chaotic.
Then the interviewer asks, "Tell me about yourself."
And the candidate says, I don't know, I'm hardworking, I guess.
Exactly. Then, when the interviewer asks why they left their previous job, the candidate says, "My boss was terrible."
That sounds negative immediately.
Very true. Then the candidate interrupts the interviewer, gives very short answers, checks their phone once, and leaves without asking any questions.
That interview feels uncomfortable from beginning to end.
Exactly. Now imagine the second candidate.
Same experience level, but a different attitude.
Exactly. This candidate arrives 10 minutes early, smiles, greets the receptionist politely, and waits calmly.
Already a much better first impression.
Then, when the interviewer says, "Tell me about yourself," the candidate says, "I have 3 years of experience in customer service, I enjoy solving problems, and I'm excited about this role because I love working with people."
That answer sounds clear, confident, and professional.
Exactly. Then, when asked why they left their previous job, they say, "I learned a lot in my previous role, but I'm ready for a new challenge."
That sounds so much more mature.
Exactly. Then they ask thoughtful questions at the end and send a thank you email after the interview.
And even if they're nervous, they still seem prepared.
Very true. And that's the important lesson here.
You don't need to be perfect.
Exactly. Most interviewers are not expecting perfection.
They're looking for someone who seems professional, positive, respectful, and easy to work with.
Very true. Here's another real-life example.
Okay.
Imagine the interviewer asks, "What is your biggest weakness?"
That question makes a lot of people panic.
It does, and many people make the mistake of giving a fake answer, like, "I work too hard."
Interviewers hear that answer all the time.
Exactly. A stronger answer would be something like, "Sometimes I focus too much on details, but I've been learning to manage my time better."
That sounds honest without sounding too negative.
Exactly. Here's another example. The interviewer asks, "Why should we hire you?"
Some people become very weak with this question.
Yes, they say things like, "I don't know, I'll try my best."
That sounds unsure.
Very true. A better answer could be, "Because I have strong communication skills, I work well under pressure, and I enjoy solving problems."
That sounds much stronger.
Exactly. Then you can give a quick example to support it.
That makes your answer feel more real.
Very true. Now let's talk about the small mistake that secretly destroys more interviews than people realize.
I've been waiting for this one.
The mistake is rushing.
Rushing?
Yes, people rush into the room. They rush their answers. They rush because they're nervous.
And when people rush, they make mistakes.
Exactly. They speak too fast, forget important details, interrupt the interviewer, and sound less confident.
That is so true, because nervous people often think speaking faster will make them sound smarter.
But usually it does the opposite.
So slowing down can actually make you sound more confident.
Exactly. A small pause before answering can completely change the way you sound.
Because it gives you time to think.
And it makes you seem more thoughtful.
That's such an important lesson.
Think about the most confident people you know.
Usually they speak calmly.
Exactly. They don't rush every sentence. They pause. They think. They stay relaxed.
And that calm energy makes people trust them more.
Very true. So before your next interview, remember this.
Slow down.
Breathe.
Listen carefully.
Think before you answer.
Smile.
Stay positive.
And remember that the interviewer is not expecting perfection.
They're simply looking for someone they can trust, respect, and imagine working with every day.
And if you avoid these common mistakes, you immediately give yourself a much better chance.
Because sometimes success is not about doing one amazing thing.
It's about avoiding the small things that quietly hold you back.
If you're still watching right now, comment below and tell us which interview mistake you think is the most dangerous.
And also tell us which mistake you think you have made in the past.
Because being honest about your mistakes is the first step to improving.
And if this episode helped you, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Talk Easy Daily, and share it with someone who has a job interview coming up soon.
Because one conversation can change someone's confidence.
And one good interview can change someone's life.
We'll see you in the next episode of Talk Easy Daily.